Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast, looking ahead to the 6 full-time rookies on the 2025 Formula One grid. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by the mighty duo. It is, of course, 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Absolutely Coop, and the main man himself, lead editor Ian Parks. Gentlemen, 6 rookies, full-time rookies on the grid this year, a remarkable number. And we're going to start with a question for you two. It's almost like going back to the big fat quiz of the year, which of course Ian won. To start things off, I have a question for the pair of you. What was the last F1 season to feature 6 full-time rookies at the start?
It was that long ago.
I
need to thank Jake Nickel, our colleague, for this answer, by the way.
I had a conversation with Jake about this very thing a few weeks ago.
What was the last F1 season to start with at least 6 F1 rookies? The actual season featured 6. So
I think 2 seasons ago it was 5. 2022 there were 5 at the start, if I remember right.
But when did
Piastri, Sargent, and De Vries.
When did we have 6?
It's 2015, I think.
No, technically, no. 2015 featured 6 rookies, but they didn't all start the season. The last season to feature 6 at the start.
I'm passing because I don't know.
I don't know.
It was 2010.
Okay.
2010, there was 6 rookies at the start. There was Karun Shantok, Lucas Di Grassi, Bruno Senna, Vitaly Petrov, Kimi Kobayashi, who did do 2 races at the end of 2009, but was a full-time rookie in 2010, and Nico Hulkenberg.
Helps considering by 3 brand new teams that year.
There was a very good point. Well, maybe in 2026 will be the next time we see maybe 6 rookies on the grid. But I mean, let's get started on this because 6 rookies. I mean, my head can't comprehend yet seeing with the 10 changes we've seen in general, what the timing screens are going to look like. It's going to take some getting used to.
Yeah.
We'll go through all 6. Let's start with, the one who has probably been in the media the most, and you've got to feel a bit bad for him for the reasons why. Let's start with Jack Doohan. Before we discuss why, let's discuss Jack himself. And Sam, I'll come to you first because Jack obviously has been with Alpine for a few years, obviously as its reserve driver, waited his time. Oscar Piastri, of course, jumped ship from Alpine as its reserve before going to McLaren. Jack's waited his time, has been given at least, I guess, his chance, if you can call it that. He's waited patiently. We've all given credit for that, at least.
Yes, it's been a very difficult period for Jack, and we'll get on to why in a minute. But he is a driver who has, I feel, really earned his place in F1, and he doesn't necessarily have the titles to back that up. A little bit like a Franco Colapinto, in the sense that in F2 he had 2 very unlucky seasons where he was on the kind of periphery or the cusp of having a championship challenge. But I think what people don't realise with Jack is that he's incredibly quick over one lap. Obviously, he comes from a storied motorsport family. But the number of poles, the number of fastest laps he was immediately racking up upon getting to F2 just shows how good he is at putting a lap together, which is obviously very, very important when it comes to F1. So it's been a difficult period for him. It's the pressure has ramped up hugely. It's going to be very difficult for him to get the best out of himself in this environment. But we are talking about elite level athletes. Oh God, that's really difficult to say.
What, elite level athlete? Come on, mate.
All right. I didn't do my warm-ups clearly. And they thrive under pressure. They get the best out of themselves. They wouldn't get to the level they're at without being able to just switch it on, channel out the noise, regardless of what's happening. So, yeah, it's a tall order for him, but hopefully he can put together a good run straight out the gate.
And Ian, let's just address, of course, why there is so much talk around Jack, and it has nothing to do with Jack himself. Of course, Alpine on Thursday announced not 1 but 2 signings. Obviously, one being Raya Hirakawa from McLaren, who's going to become a reserve driver, but more importantly, and the big name, Franco Colapinto, is signed on a multi-year deal to be its officially third and reserve driver for 2025. But I mean, Flavio Briatore has said he's a big fan of Franco, almost an admirer, sees a talent in him. You've got to wonder, with the signing of Franco, it's surely a matter of when rather than if he's going to replace either Jack or Pierre Gasly.
When was the? Here's a good question for you, but I don't know the answer. But when was the last time a driver was simply signed to be a third and reserve driver from another team and on a multi-year deal? I mean, come on, this isn't even 12 months of a 1 year contract, and all he's doing is taking on the same role at Alpine as he had at Williams.
Yeah.
So that tells you something. The fact that he's on a multi-year deal also speaks volumes, because that is, as you say, it's a case of when, not if. So surely at some point they've brought in Franco Colapinto to be in that car. Now, we've discussed poor old Jack Doohan. He gets his opportunity. Obviously, we know about Esteban Ocon at the end of last season, pulled from the program a year early, just so he obviously could take part. A race early at the end of last season, just so obviously then he could take part for Haas in the end of season test. Jack gets his chance. Great opportunity for him. But no sooner has that happened than pretty much everybody's talking about the fact that, well, actually, it looks like he's only got a 5 or 6 race contract for 2025. And more than likely, if he's not pulling up any trees by then, he's going to be given the boot. Well, bloody hell, if there's not pressure then, there's pressure now with the fact that Alpine signing Franco Colapinto. Franco, as we all know, had a great start to his time, his 9-race tenure with Williams last season. Came in, replaced the crash-happy Logan Sargent, and unfortunately, poor old Franco became a little bit crash-happy himself. Obviously, major accidents in Sao Paulo, Las Vegas, and as of course I remember speaking in a podcast last year, do not forget, of course, he crashed in Azerbaijan before going on
He did
to have a great result of 8th and scoring more points in that, what was, I think, is only his second race for Williams at that particular time. Yes, it was. Then Logan Sargent managed to cross the 30-odd that he had with Williams. So at that stage, it was a great feather in his cap. He followed it up with another positive point-scoring performance in the United States Grand Prix. But then, of course, he's had those incidents, and all of a sudden you felt that the rising star that was looking like that, and my hand is pointing upwards quite sharply for those of you listening via audio, then took quite a bit of a dip after those incidents in Sao Paulo and Las Vegas. But nevertheless, Flavio Briatore made quite clear that he was an admirer. We understood there were talks that took place between Alpine and Williams towards the end of last season. And now, quite clearly, they've carried on over the intervening period. Flavio's got his man and clearly sees him as a driver for the future, not least, of course, because of the amount of money that Franco will undoubtedly bring with him. Because I remember saying at one stage last season, when Franco had started out at Williams, that James Vowles, in an interview I did with him, turned around and said to me that his phone was pretty much ringing off the hook with potential sponsors, advertisers wanting to come on board and join Williams from Argentina and the wider Latin America region, of course, because this was the first time a driver from that area had managed to get into Formula One. So there's a lot of advantages to Franco. Yes, he quite clearly has talent. We saw that on occasion. But you've got to think from Alpine's bigger picture perspective, aside from that, you would assume, are looking at the financial possibilities that come with hiring a driver like Franco.
What's really go on, Sam?
I was just going to say that, yeah, I think you're right that there does feel to be an element of recency bias when it comes to Franco. It's kind of, it's washed. A lot of his crashes have been kind of washed away, and it's like it's very focused on those 5 points. But one thing I don't know if you picked up on it when you were doing the releases that came out yesterday. Well, came out when Franco was confirmed for Alpine. I thought what was fascinating was James Vowles' comment, where he said that Alpine is essentially the best place for Franco to get a race seat in 2025 or 2026. The fact that he even said that just speaks volumes, and I think it really does, speak to how Alpine and Williams are viewing the situation.
But that kind of builds on to what I was about to say, actually, because obviously reading some quotes from Flavio over the winter, and he's very much saying that, if Pierre or Jack are not performing, then he'll have no problem to make a driver change mid-season, which then alludes to perhaps why Franco's been signed on. But Ian, this encompasses something I want to ask you about, because you mentioned yourself about something about Flavio. Flavio is obviously there as the executive advisor. Oliver Oakes is the team principal. Yet, despite the roles, so to speak, it does feel like it is Flavio who is putting all the shots.
And those kind of areas, yes, quite naturally. That's become pretty apparent from what we saw over the final few months of last season following Flavio's arrival, with Oliver pretty much, being the hands-on track guy. Their roles are quite split in that kind of scenario. And the one thing we know about Flavio is that he knows drivers. If he's got an eye for talent, if there's one guy that has an eye for talent in Formula One when it comes to drivers, it is Flavio Briatore. We've seen that in the past. And I've no doubt that he's looked at Franco and thought, we can definitely do something with this guy. But as Sam pointed out, those comments were very, very telling from James Vowles in that press release. Because from James's perspective, why not hold on to Franco for one more season at least? Because let's say it doesn't go well for Alex Albon next season, or this coming season. With Carlos Sainz coming on board, who's to say that with that caliber of driver, that Carlos Sainz then makes Alex Albon look distinctly average? We know Alex is a talent. I think he's a very good driver. I think he's got a lot going for him. James quite obviously sees Alex and Carlos as a long-term driver pairing. He doesn't want to make these changes like many other teams have done, as we've seen RB, AlphaTauri, etc. A team like that. So he's putting all his eggs in one basket with Carlos and Alex. But I'm still posing the question, just what would happen if Alex has a really poor season, 2025?
Or if Carlos has a touch of the Daniel Ricciardo and he just doesn't mesh with the car, it just doesn't work. There's always that danger.
There's always that. I don't see that happening with Carlos. I genuinely don't.
Just throw it out there.
I get the point, absolutely. But you've always got to think, if you invested so much time, energy, resources into developing Franco, as Williams has, why not just at least hang on to him for that additional 12 months? Just to see where things go with Carlos and Alex, rather than releasing him as they have to Alpine. Because, going back to that press release again, you've got to suspect that James would not have let him go without assurances from Alpine or Flavio Briatore, whatever conversations they had, with him saying, I can vouch for the fact that Franco will be in that car sooner rather than later.
Exactly. And I mean, spare a thought for the likes of Paul Aaron and Victor Martins, who have just been shuffled down the order. Like, Paul, I feel like we were talking about this the other day, in that there's no way, surely Paul Aaron signs that contract knowing that there's a chance that Franco Colapinto then comes in and usurps him immediately, 2 months later?
And then there's Rio Haricaro as well. So he's also taken on exactly the same role as Franco Colapinto, test and reserve. Paul Aaron, reserve driver. How many reserve drivers does a Formula One team need, for goodness sake? What are they expecting both Pierre and Jack to be out of the car by mid-season? Strange goings on at Alpine, but that's what that team is all about. It's always been like that.
And of course, for those who are watching this podcast on YouTube, let us know your thoughts in the comment section below on Franco Colapinto being signed by Alpine. What race do you think perhaps he might be introduced, or which driver do you think he would replace, Jack or Pierre? There's also a moment just to make sure, if you do like our content, please do smash the like button on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And a very quick shout out to Karen. You know who you are. Thank you so much for the message you sent. We've all seen it and it was amazing. So thank you so much for that. And hopefully you enjoy this podcast.
Thanks, Karen.
Thank you.
Yeah, there's something that's really interesting. And it goes back to the Franco conversation a little bit, and why Williams would let him go. Because the big question with rookies is always, how many races are they going to last? And that's, not only the story with Jack Doohan at Alpine, but also let's move on to Red Bull, and a driver we discussed in the last week's podcast. Liam Lawson, of course, is alongside Max Verstappen, having never had a full-time F1 seat, only 11 appearances standing in, of course, at Racing Bulls, formerly known as RB. And there's obviously pressure there because obviously Christian Horner has come out and said, we don't want Liam to be comparing himself to Max, just to focus on himself. Sam, that's something very, very difficult for any driver to do when you're alongside Max, because obviously the question as well, and a lot of people seem to be very divided on how long they think Liam will last. Some think he may not even do the season. Some think he'll be good for a few years. Because actually, Carlos Sainz at Williams is a driver who is linked to several teams, Red Bull being one of them. And of course, if Liam weren't to do well, hopefully he does, but if he wasn't, then all of a sudden that could be a big seat available. Liam has, do you think of all the rookies, perhaps it's actually maybe the most pressure on him given the seat he does have?
In many ways, yes, because it's right at the top of the sport. It's such a difficult seat to come into and succeed in, as we've seen time and time again. The likes of Pierre Gasly, Alex Albon, two drivers who we've spoken glowingly about in the past and also mentioned today already. And for Liam, though, I feel he's played a very good game with Red Bull. He said the right things. And I don't think it's necessarily him just saying that. I think it probably genuinely is his attitude. He's said things of the likes of, it's for the driver to come in and adapt to the car. It shouldn't be the team doing, vice versa. I have to move into that environment and get on board and swim and just, go from there. So stuff that Christian Horner has also said very much marries up with that type of attitude, that mindset, that mentality. And as we've talked about in the past, that was the kind of key principle as to why Red Bull opted for Liam over Yuki at this point. But again, if Liam does falter and it doesn't work out in the way that they hope, they do still have Yuki there as someone, as a kind of plug and play solution, at least for this year, where you can go, look, what's the worst that could happen? We'll give him half a year. He might do really well. Great. There's a driver for next year. If he doesn't, his contract's only for 2025. We can let him go, so on and so forth, and then we can address the driver market. But yeah, a driver like Carlos Sainz, it is a miss in many ways for Red Bull, but we know that there's far more things at play as to why that didn't happen and probably won't happen. I think there's just too much there, and especially with them trying to keep hold of Max Verstappen, which has got to be and will always be their kind of first priority.
But of course, a bit like Jack, Liam has waited for his chance here, hasn't he? He's done the reserve role. He's done the horrible stuff of standing in the garage, watching the racing happening. He's now getting his chance. So, from that point of view, Red Bull clearly view him very highly because, he's not tried to depart when things haven't been going his way. He's, done the nitty gritty stuff and is now being rewarded with, the best seat the Red Bull could offer him.
He has. He's got that seat. With the question that you posed to Sam, there comes with it one hell of a lot of pressure because he is going to be far more in the spotlight than any of the other five rookies probably put together in many respects because of the team he's with, the car he will have underneath him, and the teammate alongside him. Because whoever's been in that car alongside Max Verstappen, it's always a case of how good is that driver going to be compared to what Max is doing. And everybody will be comparing how he will be faring compared to Max because Max is the benchmark in Formula One at the end of the day. So whilst Christian Horner's quite clearly turned around and said to Liam, look, you have to solely focus on what you're doing, ignore what the other side of the garage is doing, there will always be an element within any driver in wanting to compare himself to his teammate because at the bottom line, at the end of the day, in any Formula One team, that is the benchmark that you have to go against. What is your teammate doing? So there is an awful lot of pressure on Liam for enormous reasons. Yes, you've talked about Yuki as a possible backup as well, should it not work out. But also there is another driver that both Sam and I know is very highly rated within Red Bull, the one that Christian Horner has dropped into many a conversation over the course of last season, and that is Arvid Lindblad. Arvid had a superb chance to win the F3 title last season. And it blew up spectacularly with 3 rounds to go. Was within 6 points of the championship lead with those 3 rounds to go. He'd just won back-to-back sprint and feature at Silverstone, but then didn't score a point over those final 3 rounds for a variety of reasons. Some unfortunate, some of his own making, but nevertheless, there is another tremendous talent within that Red Bull pool that's coming to the fore. And we will see really what he's got about him in F2 this year. He's with a great team that's going to really push him to the fore, you would assume. So Liam also knows that, like Jack, with Franco Colapinto signing, Liam knows that not only is there Yuki Tsunoda eager, willing, and to jump into that seat, there is also another youngster coming through as well that Red Bull, we seem to believe, have a lot of high hopes in.
But not only does Liam know that, also does the other full-time Red Bull family rookie, Isaac Hadjar, because obviously Sam, he's alongside Yuki Tsunoda at Racing Bulls. We discussed him again like Liam last week, and obviously discussed Isaac's interesting radio antics. And he's another driver, though, who perhaps will know that, you know what, unlike Yuki, who obviously was given, you know, a considerable, got there eventually, amount of time to really settle and, you know, learn his F1 racecraft. With Arvid in F2, it doesn't feel like Isaac necessarily has that, in particular if he's also wanting to push on and maybe have a seat in the Red Bull team in the future.
Well, this is the beauty of the Red Bull, you know, kind of situation where they centrally contract all 4 drivers in those race seats, is that their performances are all kind of relative and dependent on each other. You know, there could be a scenario where Isaac's not performing particularly well, but Liam's having a really difficult time. Therefore, Isaac is safe because they need to make a change and, you know, kind of so on and so forth. But if Liam's performing really, really well and Isaac's a bit wobbly and they're looking to move Arvid up because they think, yeah, we've got to go for 2026, get him in the car. At that point, then, you know, Isaac is much more vulnerable. So it's all completely relative. And I think that, yeah, Isaac will know that Arvid is coming through, as he mentioned, at Campos next year, the same team that Isaac was with last year when he finished runner-up in the F2 Championship. So he'll be well aware that you've got this talent there waiting for 2026 potentially. And he's just got to get on with it, deal with it, and face that pressure and hope, to a certain extent, the Red Bull go, thank you very much, Yuki. It's been a good few years, but actually we're going to go a different direction. You know, Honda are departing. It's a new era. He'll have potentially, as we discussed last week, interests elsewhere from the likes of, you know, Cadillac or maybe Aston Martin down the road. So there's still the scenario that we could see come 2026, Isaac, Liam, and Arvid alongside Max Verstappen in those 4 seats.
Okay, so far we've discussed 3 rookies, Doohan, Lawson, and Hadjar, and for each of them we've come to conclusion they're all under a lot of pressure. Let's continue that with the 4th rookie we're going to discuss, Andrea Kimi Antonelli, of course, the Mercedes teenage sensation, the driver who is being likened to a young Max Verstappen. It's being, you know, touted as the next real big deal, and of course on his, I suppose, F1 debut, obviously put it in the wall at Monza. Ian, we speak about pressure, of course, of all the rookies, but it feels like with Kimi that he's obviously very protected by Mercedes, by Toto Wolff, because of his age and just how good they believe he is. But actually, because of the things that have been touted, being the next Max Verstappen, being a potential future multiple world champion, that in itself is very, very different pressure for Kimi to handle.
Yeah, and obviously that pressure really started pretty much as soon as Lewis Hamilton announced on February 1st last year that he was leaving Mercedes to go to Ferrari, because all of a sudden it was a question of, right, what's Mercedes got in its arsenal? What is Mercedes going to do to fill those shoes? And of course, there was all that speculation surrounding Max Verstappen. But in the end, the team ultimately decided to go in-house. I got to give Mercedes some credit for doing that. You know, how much truth there was behind the Max Verstappen noise, only those behind the scenes will know. One of the telling comments from Christian Horner was that despite all the noise, to use his word, that came out, he said if there was ever going to be anything serious, a lot of that stuff takes place behind closed doors, not in the media. So in many respects, he did not take Toto Wolff's overtures with any great seriousness, more huge grains of salt, shall we say. So in the end, Toto's decided to go down the homegrown route with a junior that's come through the ranks in Kimi. And yes, he's another driver like Liam at Red Bull that comes into Formula One with a huge spotlight on him, not only because he's with Mercedes, but because he is replacing one of the greats of all time, a 7-time Formula One champion in Lewis Hamilton. And not least, of course, in his first proper outing, Mercedes goes and bins it in the wall at Monza after 10 minutes in practice. So that was not a way to announce yourself into Formula One. He knows what he did wrong. Toto would have quite clearly told him what he did wrong. And it's going to be, as I said, not only is there huge shoes to fill, there's a huge spotlight he's stepping into, but this is an enormous amount of pressure on a very young man's shoulders. At least Liam at Red Bull, he's had these, how many Grand Prix did we say? 11 Grand Prix. 5 in 23, 6 in 24. So at least he's got something there on which he can build. Whereas Kimi, as I say, he's just got these couple of practice sessions so far. So yeah, the preseason test, at least he's going to have a good opportunity to get up to speed a little bit more. But then once things start for real in Australia in mid-March, that's when we're going to see what Kimi Antonelli is all about. I've no doubt that he's going to produce the goods. Everything that we've heard about him, everything that I've read about him suggests that this kid is, a future champion, a wonder talent. So whilst they might have brought in Valtteri Bottas, Mercedes, as its reserve driver, a good safe pair of hands should anything go wrong with Kimi, I really don't see Valtteri being brought back into the fold anytime soon.
But that's actually an interesting point I was going to bring up, is obviously, Kimi, despite all this pressure, clearly has, a lot of support, a lot of protection as well. And despite his inexperience, Mercedes has brought back, obviously, Bottas, who has said himself that being a reserve is going to be really painful watching the racing happening from the Mercedes garage. Of course, he's eyeing potentially Cadillac for 2026, but actually, he's also said himself to you, Ian, actually, obviously, in a Racing News 365 exclusive interview that, he's aware that Mercedes has this young driver in Antonelli who's going to need support. And for Kimi, you'd imagine Valtteri's probably quite a good figure to have in your corner to support you, given actually Sam as well, what Valtteri's been through himself going up against a driver like Lewis when Lewis was very much in his prime.
Completely, because I think what people
nearly said it. Come on, you nearly said absolutely.
Absolutely, of
it's
2025.
Right. I went for an equivalent. But in all seriousness, Valtteri, his time alongside Lewis, often in races he wasn't on the same level as Lewis, and he would often find himself slightly on the back foot there. However, he often went toe to toe with him in qualifying over one lap, and so there's a lot about Valtteri that I think we forget about, and it's easy to when someone spent 3 years down the order at Stake, Sauber, Alfa Romeo, Audi, the team that is always constantly changing its name, apparently. So I think it's very easy to look back at the last few years and go, yeah, he's fine. He's a 10-time Grand Prix winner. He's more than fine. He's very experienced at this point, and he will be a huge asset for the team. Also, because yes, George has come in leaps and bounds. He spent time alongside Lewis, and he's shown that he is very quick and that he probably has what it takes to lead this team. Valtteri will be able to come into a team a few years after leaving it in a new regulation set and be able to immediately see the differences in how the team operated a few years ago to how it works now. And there might be things that the team hasn't even realised has changed for the worse or better that you can point out. And so Valtteri, I think, will be a really good set of eyes for the team at large to have as well. So I think it's a huge advantage to Kimi having a driver like that there that can support him. Because I don't think Valtteri is a threat to his race seat immediately.
There's a reason why we've spoken about the 4 rookies we have done first, because they're the 4 who, at least I view very much as the ones who have some pressure to deal with. Let's go on to the final two, starting off with Ian, Ollie Bearman. Of course, a driver who actually, in all fairness, it feels like hasn't really been spoken about much in recent months, but had a very interesting 2024, Ollie, because was brilliant on debut, obviously replacing Carlos Sainz in Saudi Arabia. For Ferrari, was then brilliant again in Azerbaijan, where he replaced Kevin Magnussen, who was serving his one race ban, but then massively struggled in Sao Paulo in what were horrible conditions. And his experience really showed several spins and just struggling in the conditions altogether. But actually, it feels like for Ollie at Haas, alongside Esteban Ocon, who's not going to be an easy teammate to deal with, but it does feel like perhaps with Ferrari having Lewis, that Ollie potentially has a couple of years maybe at Haas to really settle and everyone get up to speed before, who knows, maybe being the person who replaces Lewis in a few years.
Well, the good bonus for Ollie is that it was at least given a 2-year contract. So it's not like, here you go, here's 12 months, prove yourself over that 12 months. If we don't like you or you're not good enough, out you go, basically. So at least they're giving the time and the opportunity to bed himself in, which I really like from Haas. Ayo Komatsu has come in and proven himself to be a really solid, straightforward pair of hands. He's transformed that team internally compared to the Gunther Steiner era, when it was a little bit more haphazard, shall we say. For love Gunther, don't get me wrong, bless him, great character, great personality, but given where Ayo came from a technical background, he's at least been able to steer that ship in on a more correct technical course compared to Gunther's traits. And I think that's a fair summation. And what Ayo has seen in Ollie is, and he'd seen it previously as well when he'd done practice sessions prior to his debut races last season, was a strength of character, a good communicator, someone that was quick, obviously, all those traits, and comes in this one package. And he believes that Ollie is the real deal. Ferrari also, quite naturally, believes Ollie is the real deal. Otherwise, it wouldn't have had him in its driver academy. So Ollie has a hell of a lot going for him. Naturally, you talk about Sao Paulo. A number of drivers struggled over that Grand Prix weekend. Never mind a guy that was only in his third Grand Prix.
Third, yeah.
Yeah. And in a Haas as well, that, let's face it, would perhaps not quite be as sure-footed as a Ferrari in those conditions. But nevertheless, he acquitted himself as best as he could. And yes, it wasn't the easiest of weekends, but we're not going to be judging Ollie on the course of that one weekend in Sao Paulo for Haas. We're going to be judging Ollie over the course of this coming season in particular. And I do think he has got the wherewithal to prove himself in Formula One. My only question mark is about his teammate. And we know what Esteban is like with teammates. This is an opportunity for Esteban to step into that lead role because he's the older, more experienced driver. And I really hope in that position he's going to take Ollie under his wing to a certain extent and treat him with respect, rather than with some of the teammates he's gone up against and show them considerable disrespect. I mean, we all know what his relationship was like with Pierre Gasly. It was never good from the outset when they became teammates at Alpine. And we saw how that transpired on track on a couple of occasions. It was like, I'm going to do what I want to do. I don't like you. And that obviously led to his downfall. That crash in Monaco, of course, the two came together there. And that was the final straw for Alpine to say, thanks, Esteban, but you're on your way at the end of this season. So, as I say, as the older, more experienced driver, I really want to see Esteban now show those traits of being that. And as I say, I really hope that he will take Ollie under his wing and really help bring Ollie on, because Ollie's going to need that. He's going to need that from his teammate, as all the rookies are. They're going to need to be shown a degree of respect and understanding, and just to help them learning, because even Liam Lawson, he might have 11 Grand Prix under his belt, but no doubt throughout the course of this season, he's going to be learning one hell of a lot on a very steep learning curve with Red Bull. So as I say, with regard to Ollie in particular, he's got what it takes, I believe. And as I say, I just hope he's been given that time with that 2-year contract. But I just want to see a bit more from Esteban to help him out and help nurture him along to help prove himself in Formula One this season.
I think Ocon and Bearman is actually one of the most intriguing partnerships for 2025 because you don't quite know which way that's going to go. That could go horribly, could go really, really well. Sam, I'll come to you on the final rookie, who I guess is probably entering F1 as one of the most decorated. It is, of course, the reigning Formula 2 champion, Gabriel Bortoleto, obviously at Stake Sauber alongside Nico Hulkenberg, which in itself is another really interesting duo, given how well Nico has performed since returning to F1. But obviously for Bortoleto, it's an interesting situation because he joins F1 with minimal experience in F1 as well, very little testing anything, but also in what is expected to be probably the most uncompetitive package on the car. At least that seemed to be what Valtteri was saying looking ahead to Stakes 2025 season. But as well, obviously, it's a big transitional year for Stakes Sauber with, of course, Audi in 2026, when you imagine Bortoleto would get his real chance. It's going to be, for all the rookies, actually, for very different reasons, a really, really hard one for Bortoleto.
Yes and no, because he is also driving with the safety of a 2-year deal, that he'll have that year. And I think in some ways, because of how much Stake are also viewing it as a transitional year, that adds to the comfort. He's almost able to learn on the fly and get that kind of testing mileage in almost that the other guys maybe already have, but he can do it in a competitive environment. This is, it's not a test environment in that sense. You're doing it week in, week out. So that's, I think, a really big advantage for Gabriel Bortoleto. You're right. He's a very decorated driver, back-to-back F3 and F2 champion.
Of course, yeah.
The likes of, Charles Leclerc, George Russell, Oscar Piastri. There's some pretty good company to be in, let's face it. So I don't have any concerns at all about Gabriel, really. I think, and the art of Rookie of the Year is very difficult in F1, given the different packages. And also, we saw how difficult it was for Valtteri and Zhou to distinguish themselves this year, given how uncompetitive that Stake was. But I think, come the end of the year, there's a very good chance we're looking back at Gabriel and saying, actually, I think he probably was the strongest rookie. Or, there are many people who feel that he could go toe-to-toe with Nico Hulkenberg, which is a big claim, given how strong Nico has been since coming back into F1. So Gabriel, I don't have any concerns. He's very consistent. His F3 campaign that he won the title in, his first year, obviously, from memory, he only won a couple of rounds and just kind of saw it through from there. Just a very consistent, just maximising, a very mature approach, and he's got the speed to go with it. So, I think a very exciting prospect, and in some ways surprising that McLaren let him go.
In which case, then, I'm going to push you then, Sam, on a point you made whilst discussing Bortoleto to end this episode on the rookies. Which rookie, then, do you think is going to excel the most? You can only pick one. And which one do you expect to exit F1 first? Is he going to stick with Bortoleto then, based on what you said?
I'm going to stick with Bortoleto.
Okay, for excel. Okay.
Because
that'd be a weird change otherwise.
Again, it's so difficult to measure it, but I'm going to stick with it. In terms of who I think will exit first, I think it's brutally harsh, but I think it will be Jack Doohan. It's the bookies' pick at this point, and I think there isn't smoke without fire. Realistically, the everything's lining up for that to happen. Whether or not this unfounded 5-6 race contract thing is true or not, why else would those moves be made at Alpine?
Okay, right. I'll let Ian. I'm going to leave Ian a minute because I'm going to go controversial, and I'm going to say the one who's going to excel the most is going to be Liam Lawson. I've but I'm also going to say for exiting F1 first, I'm going to say Hadjar. I've got a feeling Doohan is going to surprise a few people, and actually, given everything, I would love to see that because I think that would be a really fascinating storyline to see how it would then make Pierre Gasly react as well, given that Franco is quite clearly going to be knocking on Flavio's door after every race saying, is it my turn yet? Ian, for you then, come on then.
Yeah, for me, Liam, I just think despite everything we've discussed around Liam, pressure on his shoulders coming into the Red Bull seat, being alongside Max. I just felt that across all his Grand Prix so far, he has displayed a level-headedness inside the car, a sure-footedness behind the wheel, never more so than in Sao Paulo, when of all the drivers across that Grand Prix weekend, he was one of those that barely put a wheel out of place. Not everything went too well for him, but nevertheless, he still gave quite an accomplished performance, I felt, given the circumstances. And I feel that there is just enough within Liam that will ensure that Red Bull will be in the mix this season for the Constructors' title if it can produce a reasonable car from the get-go, which, of course, is really what played into Max Verstappen's hands in 2024 when, with that car, he was able to win 4 of the first 5, 7 of the first 10 before, obviously, things then really started to go awry. But nevertheless, he'd done enough over those first 10 races to give him that advantage. But his teammate, of course, Checo Perez, was the big fly in the ointment, let the team down. 250 points at the end of the season behind Max. I really do not see Liam falling that far short. I do think he has got enough about him. So I'm going to go Liam to finish the best of the rookies. And unfortunately, I've got to go with Jack. Sam's no smoke without fire, or kind of phraseology. Really sums it up for me. And I didn't see too much from Jack in that one role he had in Abu Dhabi at the end of the last season. So here was an opportunity. Here was a chance to really show people why you've been given the opportunity now. And I thought he let himself down a little bit. So I like Jack. I've spoken to him a few times. I think he's a tremendous character. He's got a great personality. I do still think there is a lot of talent within him, as Sam has rightly pointed out earlier on in his appraisal. But Franco Colapinto, the signing him, just that case of when, not if. And I do think that when is going to be at some point.
What you've heard from us three. For those who are watching this podcast on YouTube, let us know in the comment section below which rookie you think is going to excel the most and which one you think is set for the quickest exit. Guys, amazing as always. This has been the latest episode of the Racing News 365 podcast from Sam, Ian, and myself. We'll see you next week. See you later.
As always, take care, folks.
Thanks for joining us.